Ladies and gentlemen, it has happened. Because when you get major outlets agreeing on this matter, including the BBC, then you know what's coming. Lawson is out and Tsunoda is in. And yes! My call from a year ago finally came true. While the much-rumoured emergency meeting between Red Bull's top brass and drivers was supposedly meant to happen this Thursday, it turns out that a different meeting may have already sealed Liam Lawson's fate in Dubai just yesterday. Reports suggest that a decision on the matter has indeed been made, that Lawson is out and Tsunoda is in. That bestows upon Liam Lawson an unfortunate statistic that he is the fastest Red Bull driver in the team's 20-year history to have been promoted and then demoted. And no, this is not yet another dig at Liam's credibility as a racing driver. No, this has gone way beyond that. This is purely a fundamental issue with Red Bull Racing and how fragile the organisation is. I did hesitate in making this video, but when I started to hear publications such as The Race, ESPN, and now BBC Sport covering this idea, saying that it could happen and that Red Bull was set to replace Liam with Yuki, then most likely it will happen. We just need to wait for teams to actually put out their official statements. I can understand why some circles of the internet might be saying, oh, come off it, Law. BBC Sport, Andrew Benson, that's British bias right there. But quite frankly, in this case, if BBC Sport actually even give this news the time of day, it must prove that surely there is some weight behind this. But needless to say, this entire situation has been an absolute mess. A mess that needn't necessarily have to have gone down the way it has, where it eviscerated a prospective future team leader or, at best, set its progress back a good couple of years. But quite honestly, given previous examples of this within the team's history, it is extremely unlikely, borderline impossible, that Liam Lawson will get a second crack at the whip at Red Bull Racing, because Pierre Gasly would like to chime in with his own opinions, him spending a good 3 seasons, 3 full ones, or 3.5, at Toro Rosso and then AlphaTauri to try and convince the higher bods that he was worthy of having a second chance. That never happened, then he left. Either Liam Lawson's going to have to try and find his fortune elsewhere, or he's just going to have to make do with where he is at the second team, being the brand new benchmark. The role that Tsunoda seemingly has vacated. And if Horner's team decide to let Yuki go at the end of the year anyway, or the Japanese driver moves on his own accord, then maybe Liam might get another shot if he really improves, especially when the new regs kick in. But that is a big if. It all depends on how the rest of this season goes. In any case, you may want to gain further insight into the original firestarter for this particular news, Erik van Haren from De Telegraaf. This then of course got picked up by Canal Plus, which then made people go, oh, interesting, okay, that's really interesting. Then ESPN bothered to give it the time of day, then The Race picked it up, and now BBC Sport has. And according to some of my various followers, even the big Japanese news outlets are picking this up, running it as headline news rather than it just being on their sporting sections. So to get a real good understanding from the original source on this issue, from Erik, here it is, right here, translated of course from Dutch. Ahem. Liam Lawson is definitively sidelined by Red Bull Racing after just 2 races. From the Japanese Grand Prix onwards, Yuki Tsunoda is Max Verstappen's new teammate. On Tuesday, a top meeting of Red Bull took place in Dubai, where the Thai major shareholder, Shalom Yudvidya, lives. Engine supplier Honda is also involved in the deal. The Japanese manufacturer supports Tsunoda, 24, also financially, which makes the deal financially still somewhat interesting for Red Bull. Lawson is demoted to Racing Bulls and Tsunoda is promoted after all. Lawson did not score any points in the first 2 races, and was the slowest of everyone in both the sprint and regular qualifying in China. Those performances have led to a lot of internal dissatisfaction. Well, quite frankly, Liam's performance in that car and the way the team actually supported him caused a lot of external dissatisfaction. Promoting Lawson so early and then dropping him like this, it's bruised Red Bull's credibility. Add to that Horner's decision to prematurely extend Checo's contract, a move meant to motivate him by removing pressure, and you start to question the judgment of F1's longest-serving team principal. Let's just say that his judgment has been thrown into considerable doubt. Enough to crack out the foam. Is he as good as he used to be, or has he simply lost his touch? And I can imagine that a lot of you out there would agree with my assumptions and also claim other reasons as well. But considering where I am from, I have to be careful with what I say, because of other things. But Red Bull, they simply don't have any choice in the matter. Right now, with Yuki Tsunoda, they have to give it a go! What gives me further confidence to cover the certain return of the Kiwi to the Faenza outfit is not only the comments I talked about in my previous video regarding Verstappen and how he reckons Lawson would be faster in the V-carb machine than the Red Bull one, it's that Horner agrees with Verstappen as well on the matter, in comments made to the media. And those I shall present to you right now. Ahem. I think the Racing Bull is a more settled car in terms of it, probably is a little more stable on entry. It probably has a bit more understeer in that car and therefore is easier to adapt to, but you can see the difference in pace in the cars on a longer stint. But I think in terms of finding the limit in a car that has inherent understeer, it's always going to be easier than finding the limit in a car that is a little more edgy. Translation, the Racing Bull's V-Carb 02, it's a more forgiving car. It's ideal for rookies, which technically Liam Lawson still is. And I will say this once more, Lawson's promotion was not a reward. It was about contract clauses and convenience and calling of bluffs, not merit. Locking Lawson into the Red Bull family prevented any other team from exploiting the work the team had put into the driver's development up until now, before they themselves could have probably extracted a meaningful amount of it. I've talked about this at great length now that I think you know the story at this point, but it would have been quite safe to say that Red Bull would have wanted to have first dibs on this driver, and now it's up to the other teams to maybe consider whether or not they would want to have sloppy seconds. But quite frankly at this point, I really don't see any other team picking up Lawson at this point, and maybe this is exactly what Red Bull wanted. Because potentially, by the time he might regain some footing at V-Carb, Red Bull's next wave, including Arvid Lindblad, could already be on the rise. He's so highly rated, both Horner and Marko are aligned on him. A rarity. They even sought special dispensation from the FIA to grant him a super license before he turns 18. Granted, this particular action was taken before Lawson's rapid decline and disastrous start, but if Isaac Hadjar continues to impress this year, and if Tsunoda does survive his test of might in the RB21 and his own bluffs are called, and he does rise to the occasion, then there may no longer be any room at the inn for Liam Lawson, and he is indeed pushed out at the end of the year with no other alternative in Formula 1. It may be Verstappen Tsunoda in 2026, and then Hadjar and Lindblad next year at V-Carb. And if the likes of Sergio Rodriguez on the socials is anything to go by, he's been quite accurate upon my observation, honestly. Lawson should count as lucky stars that he's even had a second chance with V-Carb this year to try and regain some confidence, since additional reports and rumours are circulating that Alpine's Flavio Briatore nixed an idea of Franco Colapinto being loaned out to Racing Bulls to partner Hadjar. Quite frankly, that move would have saved the bacon of one Jack Do, and he would have been able to last out the entire season without the threat of the Argentinian breathing down his neck. And quite frankly, no. I really don't believe that this could have possibly happened. Marko had the chance to hire Colapinto last year, but after Vegas, he passed on the matter, so therefore, he shouldn't get a second bite at the apple. But we have seen various photographs of this meeting taking place within the paddock, the Alpine one in particular, where Briatore and Marko were having a conversation, but ultimately, this deal wasn't going to happen. But this lack of movement does cast doubt on Doohan's future anyway, whilst preserving Lawson's for the time being. And I wouldn't be surprised if more eyes are cast in the direction of Formula 2 now to see how Lindblad performs at the same Campos outfit which propelled Isaac toward a championship bid last year. A top 4 finish in the standings in F2, and then seeing what happens when he is compared in that V-Carb with Lawson and Lindblad, and then it will be a very, very stressful time for Lawson at the time when he's meant to try and regain some concentration and confidence. Not exactly helpful. Liam Lawson, he's going to have to dig deep to try and regain any sense of belonging within Formula 1, with, fortunately, a car that seemingly is almost somewhat an envious prospect from one Max Verstappen, in that it is just plainly easier to drive. Not to mention a more supportive working environment fostered by Lauren Mekies and maybe further emboldened by the departed Daniel Ricciardo. But at the same time, Racing Bulls really needs to bone up on their strategies, because at this point, they probably lost so many points to the matter of making wrong pit calls at the wrong moment. 9th with only 3 points? It's just not right. Okay, so in the midst of all of this, Max Verstappen's been relatively quiet. What does he think about this whole situation? Does he agree whether or not Liam was deserving of a role at Red Bull? Well, maybe this might actually be a situation which might give him more reason to maybe reconsider his future with them. According to said articles from GP Blog, the Dutchman's considerations were not taken into account concerning the matter. In Max's honest opinion, reportedly, he would rather have it be Lawson would remain with the team for the foreseeable future, despite Verstappen publicly commenting that Liam would be faster in the Racing Bulls car. Strange as it may seem, Max might actually have a point. He's likely reminding all that will listen to him that the RB21 is not an easy car to drive, especially for rookies. So maybe, I don't know, why don't you try and fix it so Liam can drive it slightly more easily? And that it's not fair to blame all the shortcomings of where Red Bull are right now on the drivers solely. Further developments need to be made to this car, so that means Max Verstappen doesn't have to overdrive it, just absolutely rev the nuts off of it to try and get any chance of getting a podium on a race weekend. He's having to go over 100%. Some occasions last year where he was starting to get more and more frustrated that it was up to him to try and make up the goods and defend his own title. The technical team at Red Bull were not doing enough, according to the Dutchman, and seemingly they are doing better, but still not up to the expectations of one Max Verstappen, who he himself is now getting embedded into the technical team to try and help them solve the problem, instead of just allowing them to do their own thing. He cannot trust them anymore to just go off and come up with something. He has to now get his hands dirty, and that is not optimal when you are mounting a title defense. You've got to be focused on that solely to be able to provide the most optimal outcome. Granted, you could argue that Verstappen's management team and father fostered a culture for so long at Red Bull where Max had to come first. His wants and needs were paramount in order to get anywhere close to challenging the ever-dominant Mercedes back in the day. Now though, the form book, it's been blown wide open. You need to have both cars on it, and Max may have seen the light on this matter. Max's reported frustration with Red Bull, this latest example of frustration, this speaks volumes. In the last 4 months, he has seen 2 driver changes. And according to people that have responded to my feedback on social media, Yuki Tsunoda may have now actually had 7 teammates since he first joined F1 in 2021. That's not team stability, that's just chaos. But, as Lord Baelish from Game of Thrones once said, chaos is a ladder. In short, Max is telling the team to stop expecting the driver to carry the car every weekend. And despite Verstappen's suggested desire to cut Liam some slack at this time, Red Bull's management has once again decided not to heed his warnings and replaced Lawson with Tsunoda, supposedly after just 2 race weekends. Whichever way you look at it, it has been nothing short of a disastrous time of it for the Red Bull racing operation. Now, you might be thinking that this is all overblown, that the wider world, the journalists of Formula One, are just looking for any reason to dogpile the Red Bull racing team after the trials and tribulations it's had in the past 15 months. Well, you know the answer to that, Red Bull. Stop being so controversial! But to counter that supposition, maybe Red Bull needs a change in leadership and a removal of a special advisor who is clearly not so special anymore. Maybe LawRence should be in charge of the senior team, replacing Christian Horner, who can then go and skulk off to the powertrains division and just completely obsess himself with it. Say what you will about Racing Bull's strategic efforts, but when it comes to management of the team and the drivers as a whole, he is absolutely LawRence an ideal candidate. Maybe a breath of fresh air for all concerned at Red Bull Racing. Needless to say, whilst I am quite sure that Max Verstappen and Yuki Tsunoda will get along just fine as teammates since they are quite familiar with one another as individual people, in fact you could say that maybe their rapport might almost be as strong as it was with Verstappen and Ricciardo. But at this time, what's transpired in just the first 2 races of 2025 is that the organisational efforts of Red Bull are just as chaotic and mismanaged as the technical department. There is not one single side of the entire operation, bar the actual mechanics themselves and the day-to-day administrators, that are even able to get some semblance of continuity. Something that ironically Christian Horner has been longing to strive for. Stability and continuity, eh? I hardly know the word. Whilst McLaren and Mercedes have gotten their acts together after starting this present regulation cycle in a relatively poor position, Red Bull's gone the other way, with none or very few of the senior figures who put the imposing framework in place around to help things turn around. Granted, Ferrari are dealing with their own struggles and fires to put out, but Red Bull have known for a very long time arguably since 2017, that if the team can no longer give Max Verstappen a car that he can competitively race in, then something has got to give. And it really wouldn't surprise me that all of the rumours about him leaving the team earlier than 2028 will start to rise to the surface again. And quite frankly, at this point, the management has got to take some of the blame, including the likes of the technical director, Pierre Wache, who simply has not come up with an answer and just decides to just go their own way instead of just listening to the drivers. Checo fell because of this, Liam has fallen because of this, and Max may just decide, stuff you. Okay, you might counter this thought by just saying, well, wait a minute, Max Verstappen's been relatively calm in the paddock, he's been quite chill. Well, maybe that might be down to the fact he is working closely with the engineers and he probably gets on famously with them, but I do sense that something is off. Perhaps he's a little too calm, like maybe he's come up to some sort of conclusion and he knows what his future's going to be. So, phone for thought. Now, in regards to Yuki Tsunoda, many would now be understandably dreading what may be coming his way, that he might be destined to struggle in a car which is proven to be inhospitable to anyone whose name doesn't begin with M and ends with Axe. Now, what doesn't help Yuki Tsunoda's prospects is that for many months now, Tsunoda has gotten on the blower multiple times to journalists and anyone who will listen that he is simply at one with the car, that he's driven the RB20, he may have had a go in the simulator with the RB21, and his overall assessment of the matter is like, yeah, I can make this work. Cool. Yeah, all right, let's do it. For months, he has been constantly saying that the situation regarding him being overlooked for the top team has been nothing short of weird and bizarre, and that maybe it might have had something to do with political reasons. Well, as it's now transpired with the way that Liam Lawson has struggled and contractual shenanigans and bluffs, he may have been right. Maybe indeed it was political. Because it really doesn't help that Racing Bulls have backed him up, saying that the choice to not promote him after having him done his time, nearly 100 Grand Prix at this point, is really, really unorthodox. And when you have this disconnect between the sister team and the senior team, it just proves that, organisationally speaking, Red Bull is completely lost at sea. They're not on the same page, and they need to be right now. From a public relations point of view, placing Yuki in the car next to Max is a positive move, which ideally should have been utilised to make up for the negative move PR-wise of getting rid of Checo, replacing one popular driver with another one. However, by putting in Yuki now for the Japanese Grand Prix, it's all been reduced, this effort, to just simple damage limitation, just to prevent the issue from getting worse. But right now, Honda is sitting pretty. After many months of battling it out with the Red Bull bods trying to give Yuki Tsunoda the best chance possible for a seat this season, they exhausted all their resources and connections by getting him that test in Abu Dhabi. After that, they'd run out of ideas. They told Yuki, there's nothing more we can do for you. All we can do now is just support you financially. And we might have to reassess what we do with future Japanese talent, so maybe they might even have a chance to survive outside of Japan in terms of getting a motorsporting career. Which was about time, quite frankly. And now, all of these future talent, including Yuki, can get bespoke management that can play to their strengths and tuck away the weaknesses. Whilst Yuki has been frequently showcasing his more mature outlook on things in interviews and team radio recently, there is a matter of having his bullish assertions that he can make the rather edgy RB 2021 play ball with this particular driving style. Yuki says he can. Okay, show us what you got. But there is cause for cautious optimism though, since he is the Red Bull Racing reserve driver. And this isn't just some honorary title to placate Honda in their final year together as power unit suppliers. By being the Red Bull Racing reserve driver, Yuki has to be ready to go to make the switch. His seat needs to be right in the back of the garage to be slotted in. He needs to be at one with the car, at least have some vague understanding of how the characteristics works. That means he can be at full guns blazing right from the start of when he's put in. And it really would be safe to say that he has been in the simulator with the RB21 to try and see whether or not he can actually provide some feedback and at least be aware of its particular characteristics in comparison to the RB20 that he did drive in the flesh last year. So it's not like he's going in blind or anything like that, so I do believe that Yuki's got some basis in his brain and in his bum and in his feet that he can at least have a try, that he can at least be better than Lawson, maybe better than Checo, which may mean he can at least get some points to stop further teams from maybe giving them a spook, namely Williams. They can at least respond back to Ferrari more quickly. And I would expect that Yuki's time in the simulator has probably been intensified after the Chinese Grand Prix, to provide further evidence that he would be a more worthwhile option for all concerned. And if it transpires that Tsunoda does get the call-up, then all eyes will be on him to deliver all the confidence on the matter that he has exuded about it. If he can deliver, and he is better than Liam Lawson, or better yet, he turns out to be really close to Max, within the 0.3 of a second that Helmut Marko originally cited to Liam that was the ideal goal for him, this could easily see to it that Yuki's time in Formula 1 is extended for a few more years, either with another team, most people are pointing to Cadillac at the moment, or maybe Christian Horner might realise the error of his ways and go, you know what, Yuki, why don't you stick around after all after Honda pack up and leave? Because if he can do that, then he will be solely at that team on merit. But at the same time, right now, he is not contracted for next year to any team, so I think it's very obvious that his management and himself have been talking to multiple teams, resuming talks that had been curtailed last year when Red Bull locked him in for 2025. So it would be foolish to say that Yuki's not talking to anybody right now, so maybe he might just decide to go, thanks but no thanks to Red Bull, I'd rather have a long-term future with another team instead of thinking that my career may be over within maybe 10 or so races if I just suddenly dip off. Or maybe he might just wait it out for Max just to say, you know what, I'm sick of this, I'm off, and then Yuki could, ironically out of all of this, become the lead driver. Imagine that, after all the stuff that's been happening, and after all of this time of him being overlooked or said, oh, he's too emotional. Well, who's emotional now, huh? Christian, Helmut. And then, in case things don't work out, or the team say thanks but no thanks and remove him anyway, regardless of what results he picks up, this will be not good for anyone concerned. But Red Bull, they will not receive overwhelming praise for this move, I am sure of it. They are damned if they do, and they are damned if they don't. If Yuki steps into this car and proves to be not much better than Checo or Liam, then this will prove without any shadow of a doubt, you cannot deny it, that that second seat is no place for anybody. And then on the other hand, if Yuki then steps in and provides some really good benchmarks and actually provides some points and is relatively competitive toward Max, or maybe even matching him, then people will be going, well, why didn't you put this guy in the car in the first place? Questions will need to be answered at that point. What was the real reason Red Bull didn't choose him back in December? In the end, all of this, the chaos, the switches, the rumours, it's hurting Red Bull more than helping. The team looks directionless, the junior program is shaky, their golden boy is growing frustrated, and now Yuki Tsunoda becomes the wild card. Sink or swim. Either way, the pressure is on. Some may say this is incredibly overblown and unfair for myself and other media outlets to be dogpiling on the team in this manner. However, with each day that passes, there is more and more evidence and justification to say that Red Bull is an incredibly shaky and fragile team. That if Max Verstappen decides to just pack up and leave one day, Red Bull may find itself in a position where it may no longer be a front-running team, but stuck in the midfield. And any midfield team, most particularly Williams and Haas, they will be wanting desperately to get into that front-running club. Both Horner and Marko's reputation in the past 24 months, it's just been dragged through the dirt for multiple reasons. You go back to where they were at the end of 2022, their standing within the entire F1 world is far lower than back in that day, when they got their double with Checo and Verstappen. Yuki could perhaps buy them some time, or even ensure his F1 career lives on, maybe even earn a future with Red Bull after Honda leaves. And as for Liam, this move may be a reprieve, yes, but that fallback to the sister team, that will not last forever. Meanwhile, Mercedes are on the charge, while Red Bull and Ferrari scramble to keep up with McLaren's quiet title defense. To find out why I believe George Russell is in the form of his life now Lewis Hamilton is no longer his teammate, and how he could be the one to respond to the McLaren's title challenge, watch this video next, straight after this one.